Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 4 of the podcast. One of the things I was really excited about in launching this podcast was the chance to interview some of my former clients on some of these episodes. I was excited about it for 2 reasons. The first one is that my clients have so many interesting insights in our coaching sessions. I often find myself thinking, oh my gosh, so many other people would benefit from this idea. So I wanted to give them the chance to share in their own words what has helped them, because I think that it will be helpful to you too. And because also they'll put it differently than I would. They'll have different wording, different ways of conceptualizing those insights. And I think that diversity of expression is also super helpful. So that's the first reason. The second reason I wanted to have some of my clients on is because I think they can help rectify what I think is a huge problem in the world. And the problem is that most people have no freaking clue what life coaching is like. And because most people have no freaking clue what life coaching is like, because they feel like life coaching is this mysterious black box, like what happens there and is it useful? So many people who could profoundly benefit from life coaching never work with a coach. And I'm not even just talking about working with me, though obviously if you're listening to this podcast, I would love to work with you. I'm just saying that they never work with any life coach because it all just feels so mysterious and confusing and unknown. So I think that one service I can give to the world, is to just educate more people about what life coaching is like. So in this interview, you'll hear more about things like what did we talk about in our sessions and what happened between sessions, and hopefully it will make the process of life coaching feel less like a mysterious black box. And then there's actually a third reason why I wanted to do this interview. It's a bonus third reason. And that's because my clients are really cool. And I think you're going to really enjoy meeting them. Sunny is smart and deep and really funny. And her way of being in the world, as she says quite explicitly in this interview, is quite different from mine. So I think you'll just really enjoy getting to know her. And even more so, I hope you'll feel really inspired by her courage in examining her life and her amazing story, which includes everything from working quite differently to a surprise spiritual reawakening. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Sunny. Okay, so I am so excited to have you here today to chat about coaching and to chat about what it felt like to be coached and like all the insights that you had as part of that process. So I thought it would be good to just start out by you, Sunny, introducing yourself and sharing whatever feels relevant about who you are as a person.
Okay, sure. So my name is Sunny Lee, and honestly, it feels like eons since I've met you because there's so many changes that I've undergone that have been so subtle. But I guess in terms of a personal introduction, what I feel relevant is in the fact that I was initially like a full-time freelance copy editor, writer, really hustling, working with multiple clients at any given moment to fully transition into prioritizing creative writing and working on my short story collection. And now I'm currently living the complete opposite life of literally having no job and no responsibilities in my MFA program, which luckily is fully funded. So just literally 180 in terms of my relationship with money, time. Yeah.
That's so good. Okay, so we're going to get into that too, like your transition from a very successful copywriter to a copywriter who's really prioritizing her creative work in a way you wanted to somebody who's taking the creative work even further at a fully funded top MFA program, which was your huge dream when we started working together.
Yeah. And that's another thing. I mean, now it's weird to say that because now that I'm in it, I'm like, oh,
sure. I get it. Yeah. It's it's a different experience being for sure.
But yeah, it was like a huge North Star for me for a long time. And I didn't get in the first time. So it's like this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. The resilience of that. Okay. So let's talk about, it's quite some time now because we started working together a number of years ago. Like, what do you have any memories of maybe how you were feeling in your life overall before we started working together? And like, also maybe any impressions you had about how coaching would be when you reached out?
Yeah, I remember just feeling like I wasn't in control of my life in a way. So I I felt like a lot of things were happening to me and a lot of good things were happening to me, but there was just like this dissonance of like deep dissatisfaction with anything that was happening, good or bad. And this feeling, I mean, I felt extremely tired all the time. I mean, and that has improved in, obviously is shifting a lot. But I think the big things that I came into this was I felt deeply dissatisfied from, what quote unquote on paper would like make most people happy in terms of like income and, having a stable relationship and friends and like a really robust social life. And yeah, so that the jarring feeling of like, oh, why am I unhappy if I have all of these quote unquote things that are supposed to make you happy? And then the exhaustion. And then also like, I feel like I did a lot of binging that I couldn't really understand. So I would like work, and then like binge and make terrible life decisions and like do insane shit and then like just like recover from that, which is also very, I think, added to my exhaustion. And then I would like go back into this like really tightly knit regimen of work and then like binge in a different way, like out of control.
And can you speak to, because I think everything that you're saying, probably a lot of people listening can relate to, like even you just saying like, oh, I was quite successful on a lot of different things, not just professionally successful, though you were, but also you had a relationship, you lived in New York, you looked really good on paper. And, but then there's you saying this underlying dissatisfaction that you didn't know what to do with.
Yeah.
What was it like to feel that way?
It felt like I was going crazy. Yeah. Cause I think there was, I will say, this lack or this inability to turn off or like, I guess, like sit in silence. Although like, even though I can picture that time where I would like quote unquote sit in silence, but it was just from pure exhaustion. It wasn't like intentional, like, let me just like sit down like the way that I do now. It was like, okay, I've exhausted myself. So now I can rest without having to like have all these like really scary thoughts about like my purpose in life or, what my trajectory is and all of that.
I think that's such a great point because what you're alluding to is like, I talk a lot in my work and we talked about like, what is it to sit in quietness and what comes up for you? And like, on some level, you probably thought before, like, oh, I sit in quiet, like I sit in silence, like that's fine. I do that all the time, but there can be a different quality to it. After coaching.
Yeah. And I think like maybe like if you were a third party viewer looking at my life, you would see that I would be sitting for maybe large expanses of time, like on a Saturday, but that wasn't rest. It was literally just so that I could survive. It wasn't like, me recharging. It was like me just having done so much that like, if I didn't do that, like I wouldn't be able to like go back to that like frenetic energy without like maybe having a mental breakdown or something. I don't know what would have happened.
Well, that's such a great point too. Like you were resting, but it wasn't getting you to quite the energy level that you needed. It was just getting to like survival.
Exactly. Yeah.
And can you, before we move on, like, I think that's it lighted my body when you were talking about like the binging and then the going back to the work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, tell us more about what that was like for you. When you say binging, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think binging was like just like spending a lot of money all at once. But like, again, it wasn't like irresponsible, but it was just because I was just so regimented in like my daily life in a way that wasn't sustainable, that any opportunity that I had to like go off. So binging, I guess, would be like spending a lot of money, like drinking a lot, even though I don't like drinking. I don't drink anymore, really. I'm not fully sober, but just drinking a lot, like staying out late, for no reason. And like, I'm not like having a good time, but it's like,
Yeah.
just to like burn off that steam and like, yeah, I think those were the two. It's just like spending a lot of money and then drinking, smoking. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then
and
feel shitty about it and then not do it for a long time and then like go back to it. Yeah.
Well, and I love you using that word because in my experience, I think people can like shy away from using a word like binge because it feels like, oh, that's so serious.
Yeah.
But like your life from the outside was very functional. You were
Yeah.
like, she stayed up a little too late, or
Yeah.
she made a big online shopping purchase, but whatever. It's not like it was like making your life unable to function, but it
Yeah.
still felt energetically like this sort of like release valve that didn't really feel like it was serving you. Ultimately.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really important distinction to make because, yeah, I wasn't like an alcoholic or like addicted to, smoking or like had a shopping addiction, but it was just like this outburst that needed to happen to like, for my, I don't know, my mental formation to like.
I think a lot of people can relate to that
Yeah.
feeling of the compulsion when we're feeling that we're so tight. Like I relate to that. I think that's real.
Yeah.
Well, so tell me in this same period of time, like, maybe before we started working together or like just we started working together, like what were your expectations for what coaching would be like? Why did you think that having a coach might be interesting? Because I remember you had never worked with a coach before we started working together.
Yeah. I think my expectations of a life coach were like, I was going to be given this like manual of all these like tips and tricks on how to be like more efficient with my time so that I was like kind of picturing it like a business manual of sorts where it's like very focused on like, okay, so my biggest concern and obsession and fixation was work. So it's like, okay, if I just worked smarter, like, or if I was just able to like work faster in a way, like quote unquote, be more productive, then I would have all of this other time and like freedom with the money that I can still like make to like live a better quality life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, all of these happy people have like, or like these tricks that are like, that I just don't know about. It's like, it felt like a very like tips and tricks, like rule book that I was just like, didn't have access to or something.
You just needed the manual.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. And then we started working together and we were talking right before we started recording and you told me some really funny things about how you felt when we first started working together. So share that first. Like, what was that like for you when we first started working together?
Yeah, I was like, it felt very hokey to me. So I think I remember, I mean, also my impression of Katie is like a very like happy person, which was like really alarming to me because I generally don't find company in people that are just like that outwardly positive. And so that was like a very strange feeling. And then secondly, yeah, I think it was a bit hokey because I think the first two meetings, we did a lot of like somatic body work, which I was really not, I think I had like done some breathing work, like in yoga and in like therapy, but it just felt like really like silly and dumb. I was like, this is like, I can't believe I'm like paying this person to make me do this. And then I was like, you know what? It's like, let's just see, like, it was only the first two sessions. And I was like, I'll give anything like a good try for like at least 3 months. And so I was like, okay, being open-minded about it, like, it was like really helpful. So, but yeah, I was super resistant to like a lot of the things. And I was just like, okay, like, sure, I'll do this homework of like trying to assess like how things feel in my body. I think we did this exercise of like feeling like each body part. And I was like, I literally don't feel anything below my hips. I'm like, what do you mean? Like feel your knee? I was like, I don't understand what that means. So it was just like a lot of that at the beginning. And I won't say like it was the only thing we talked about, but just, I mean, we've worked so long. So like maybe like initially I just remember feeling like very resistant to all of these ideas because they were very foreign to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and just to like to like complete that loop, like what is, because you brought up the sort of somatic side of things, which is something that I am interested in among many other things. Like, what's your thought about that now from where you're sitting today? Like, what do you feel about that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I still can't feel my knees, but I think it's a huge part of the way that I relate to myself and kind of diagnose how I'm feeling in a lot of, it's just a lot, it's like a really helpful data channel into like, okay, maybe I seem like I'm doing well, but can I like sit down for 20 minutes and like feel the contours of like my stomach like rest or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
so like I think it's just like it's a hugely helpful diagnostic tool, as well as like a check-in tool, as well as like, yeah, just an intuition like helps. I mean, I'm still struggling with like how to really, really hone in on my intuition, but it's been a huge stepping stone. And like, and I think the fear of like even having this conversation is just that I'm like, oh my God, this is like white people shit that like,
I'm
it's like
glad you said it. Yeah.
it's just like very, I mean, as someone who is like very wary of the kind of ways that these kinds of self-care things are packaged into racialized categories and whatnot, like it like there, I think the work that we've been doing did feel really authentic to me in a way that wasn't like, oh, let's just do this as like an appropriative, like girl bossy, like we're gonna like get into our feelings. Like it felt like the perfect antidote for how I'm constantly trying to like intellectualize or rationalize things that honestly shouldn't be rationalized. Like,
Well, and I want to give just the context here for anybody listening who's like, what is somatic? Why is Katie having Sunny feel her knees? Like, I think that the general context I would give is that often if we're highly cerebral people, which I was for many years, you're obviously very smart and in the mind, the body can be a way of checking in with ourselves to figure out what's true. Because like you said, maybe if your stomach, you think you're fine, but your stomach's tight, that tells you that maybe you're not as fine as you thought. Or if you're thinking about a next choice, but then your chest is feeling tight, maybe that's telling you something that you were kind of missing. So being able to sense into the body more helps us know these things. Like you were talking about intuition and stuff. That, Sunny, but I'm just saying it for the context.
That's
So of the people. Well, and can you, I also want to underline the, like, you being like this sort, is this just like white people shit? Like, because this is really important because the people cannot see you. So can you also give them a little bit of context about who you are and like why you would say that about white people shit? Because I actually get asked often by clients who are not white people, like, can you work with somebody who is of a different race or whatever? And like, what is that like for you?
Yeah, I think, so I am a Korean American immigrant. Like I moved to America when I was 2, but I was born in Korea and was like naturalized like very late in my adult life because for many reasons. But yeah, I think from like culturally speaking, I come from a background where it's not that we don't talk, we love to talk about problems in a way to like fix them. Like we're very like vocal about, or especially like my mom, who's very like good about being transparent about like all of the things that are happening in our family or like personally, whatever. But it's like to fix them instead of like being like, whoa, how is that making us all feel? And so that is a thing that I'm always, it's like, I don't sit in my feelings. And so it's always just like, how do we fix the problem? And that's even as I'm like growing older and like how people don't relate always like that. That's like a huge thing that I had to like become aware of, because some people just want to be heard and sit in their feelings and not being told a solution or like, yeah. My partner is very much like that. So
yeah, that's such a great point too. Yeah, well, and I think and you came to this being like to what you were saying earlier, like just give me the manual, tell me the things to do so that I could be efficient. You had a lot of projects you wanted to work on both professionally and then creatively as well. Like, if you're sort of implying I didn't give you a manual, like what happened? Like what was useful to those kind of initial needs for you?
Yeah, I think I feel like it was just like the conversation of just contextualizing all of the feelings. Like, it's like, wait, let's just like backtrack like 100 steps, and like that backtracking, which I don't even know how you framed it, but I felt like it was just like, wait, like we can't even address these things. It was just like the way that you ask questions, because they're like, it's kind of like the why thing, and like the Martha Beck North Star that you had recommended to me. It's like, okay, I'm always tired. And then it's like, you ask me 5 whys, and then it's like, okay, then we're finally getting somewhere. So I needed to like it wasn't just like, okay, here's this manual, let's like fix all, like, you know, if I like work from like 6 to like 10, because that's like high prime productivity, like those would have all been really cosmetic changes that didn't really address the underlying issue. Because I think the issues I thought were very superficial, when in fact they were so intertwined with so many underlying narratives that I had about what it meant to be a good citizen, what it meant to be like a professional, what it meant to be, you know, a human in the world, that I had to really unravel to find like what was authentic to me and wouldn't burn me out. Yeah.
Yeah. And we, in my memory, had a lot of conversations about like fundamentally, what do you want from life?
Yeah.
Like it was like, you know, we started talking at the beginning about sort of like, yeah, when are you going to work and whatever. But I remember like one of our big breakthroughs in my memory was like getting to the point of you prioritizing your creative work above your actual work in terms of how you spent your days. Like you would put it in the morning, or like, because it was like, actually, this is the most important thing. So don't do the other work first.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was like really hard, because the creative work is harder. So you don't want to do it. Right. And especially in that case, it was like, I was so primed with like instant gratification with my professional work, because even though it can be stressful, it's ultimately not something I'm like emotionally invested in. So, and it's like, doesn't require that much like emotional or intellectual labor, if that makes sense. And so that was really difficult for me. And I mean, yeah, I don't even know how we moved through that, because it's really hard. I feel like I blacked it out. I'm like, okay, now we're here. So I'm just like, not even going to think about how
Well, I think that's a great point to like, I think a lot of people listening to this are like, sort of like, well, what happens during coaching? You know, like what is useful about it? And like, I think there's at least one point in what you're saying, which is like, it's super iterative. It's like all of these tiny shifts versus like one big push in another direction.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, you would give me assignments where I do remember you being like, okay, if you can't even write for 10 minutes, like make it 5. And I was like, that's so dumb. Like 5 minutes of creative work, like why even bother? But it's like making everything super small, and and building up towards something. That idea was really helpful.
And what were you doing before? How was that different for you? Or would you have thought of that before?
No, because I think for me, it's like you either go hard or you go home. I think I wouldn't have thought of that because it would have felt so like trivial. And I was like, this is important work. And like, I need to like, I was of the mind that it's like, okay, let me just like ditch my, I found this new thing that I love. I need to like, you know, break up with my partner. I have to like ditch the home that I live in. Like I have to start this whole entire life of just like being a quote unquote writer, which obviously like I would have never done. Right. Like that's how like serious it felt, but like it to the point where it's like, oh, I need to like change my life. And that was the only way that I could conceive of it, is like literally burning everything down and starting all over. When in fact, there was a way to incorporate it into my routine and actually have a better gauge of whether or not this was something that was viable. Because then it's basically what I'm trying to tell by that anecdote is like, I felt like it was a very high stakes decision when in fact it could be made low stakes with the like 5-minute iterative thing. And oftentimes like you would give me that homework and like I wouldn't do it every day. I'd be like, well, this week was really rough. And I couldn't do it for whatever reasons. And that was also really helpful in the sense that, well, you were really helpful in pointing out you did have very concrete reasons as to why you couldn't do it. So like, don't like bludgeon yourself for not having done like the 5-minute work. And I think just being really realistic about like time and like, just like the limits of like the emotional and physical tank, kind of like what you're talking about in terms of energy debt. Like I wanted to just, and I still struggle with this, want to continue to believe that I have an infinite amount of resources to dedicate to my art, which is not true. And that is something that has been really, really helpful because rest has been such a huge part of being incorporated into this. And now it's like, I've gotten to the point where I am incorporating it. It's like, how can I be gentle with myself and okay with that?
Yeah, which is so different from the like push work all the time, Sunny. And I want to point out, I mean, and you know this, but like look at you, like top writing MFA program in the country, fully funded, and you got there pretty gently. Like you did make some you were very thoughtful about your time, especially during the application process. And we had a lot of conversations about like, how are you going to prioritize your work versus your relationships versus your friendships versus the creative work. But also like you didn't, my experience of you was like, you were very intentional, but like you got it all done. It was just like a little bit at a time all the way through.
Yeah. I mean, well, that was because and this is the thing that Katie is really good at, is that you just ask these like very obvious questions in a way that you're like, wait, why didn't I think of that? I remember you telling me that, or I remember you asking me, well, if you were to work a full 8-hour day on your application, do you think that would improve it? And I was like, no, I guess not. And it's like, and then just getting to the point where it's like, okay, well, how many hours would actually make you feel good that you could do it? That not only feels manageable, but like realistically is going to like make your application strong. Because you can't, and I don't know, like I'm pretty sure I'm butchering your question, but you just helped me understand that I can put an infinite amount of hours into my application process and still not get in. And also just not have, so it's just like, what, I don't know. There was something about that conversation that was really helpful in the sense that like, just creating a routine of like, okay, doing like 3 hours a day, which felt good to me and to the work,
Yeah, like showing up in a way that you really liked and that was going to be maximally effective, but also to you.
Exactly.
Well, and I think it's always so interesting talking about coaching in retrospect, because I feel like a lot of people's brains are sort of like, well, I would have thought of that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's very easy for people listening to feel like, well, but that's just an obvious thing. Like what about it do you think isn't obvious? Or like, why is coaching useful if it's on some level saying things that maybe somebody listening might be like, oh, that's kind of obvious. Like I would have thought of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's $1 million question, right? Like, I mean, I think for me, we're just all in our own silos, and sometimes you just need an external person to point out the obvious because we're so cluttered with our own emotional and intellectual bullshit that it's like, wait, did you actually think about this? Because it's so obvious and easy that it almost feels like really ridiculous that would be the path in which you take. And I think oftentimes people in like whatever like high paced environments can often really overlook the simple, most efficacious questions and solutions to problems because their somatic systems are out of whack. Like you're just literally don't have the bandwidth, or your mind is just somewhere else focusing on other problems I don't know if I'm answering your question, but basically it's easy to when you're not in like an emotional problem, like when you're in a problem, life problem,
Yeah.
it feels impossible to get out of. And I think life coaching helps you do that in a way that is like, you have the tools, but you also need to do the work in a way that is very like simple.
That really lands in me. It's like the good news is it's not going to be this like jerky, exhausting path. It doesn't need to be this like life dramatic change from one day to the next. That's the good news. And like, yeah, some of it in retrospect might sound simple, but like we don't see the simple thing, like, or we don't apply it to us, or we're just so overwhelmed, we're not going to see it. I feel like it's my synthesis of what you're saying.
Yeah, totally.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the creative side, like, and the work side. Like, I some of the bigger themes for me, for you, from our work, were also like on the relationship side and also on the spirituality side. Like, I wonder if you could chat a bit about those as well.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the spirituality, that was like such an unforeseen element of our conversation that if I had known that I would just go back to being a Christian again, like I honestly don't know if I would have like become, it's just like such a bizarre, was such a bizarre path. Like even now I think about it and it's like, it's just so crazy to me. Like I was going in for professional development in what my mind was professional development. And then I just like really, like I returned to my faith in a way that has completely reinformed the way that I think about the world, which is insane to me. Yeah, I think I started doing the artist way. There's just so much synchronicity in like our conversations with my creative life and my newfound religious practice, which was, those connections were made, I think, with a lot of your help. There was like some seeds, I had been raised Christian. I didn't go for a long time for a lot of reasons, which more of the obvious ones of like, racial disparity, racism, white evangelicalism, regressive social politics. And I mean, those are still things that the church as a whole struggle with, but the ways in which my spiritual path aligned so much with what life coaching is, in terms of like this Christian God being a God of rest, him being the ultimate creator, and thus we are all creatives and creators in our own right. And also just patience. I think there's just so many parallels of like my developing spiritual life and life coaching, like patience and gentleness in a way, like in all aspects. I don't know if that's helpful. I don't know if I answered.
No, I think it's beautiful. I mean, it's, watching you as your coach, like, yeah, there was like a real period where you really refound your spiritual life, and it became this incredible source of like strength and intuition in your creative life. And also like my sense has really informed how you relate to friendships and all sorts of other things. And I want to name, like, I don't know that I wouldn't really identify as a Christian. I don't particularly know the Bible. Exactly. Like I'm not like a Christian coach in any sense, but I totally like loved our conversations about spirituality. They were so interesting to me and continue to be. I wonder what that was like for you. Like, I mean, I don't know that I ever said I wasn't a Christian, but it was like, that's not my background necessarily.
Yeah. And I thought that's why it was so bizarre. I was like, this is so weird. I just remember, I don't know, like, I think that's the beauty and like talent of like, honestly, your work is that it's so specifically tailored to the person. And I think that, I mean, obviously, I think the resistance that I was talking about earlier, it's like wonky because like we're still getting to know each other. You're still like, and I think in like the first 2-3 months, like it was just a lot of data collection. And and I think when that happened, I was like, wow, Katie is not even Christian. I'm not even Christian to some degree. And it's like, this is just how we ended up because of the really deep kind of like work of just like expressing my insecurities, like the narratives that I had about myself. And like this just, I don't know, like it just kept the conversation about spirituality and God kept cropping up in the ways that we talked, from like the artist way and like Martha Beck. So it was just really weird. I don't know. I think, yeah, that's all I have to say. It was very bizarre, completely unexpected. I think it just goes to show you that like you're really tapping into like something deeper for like your clients in a way that's freaky and spooky. And I don't appreciate it.
What I want to appreciate about you, like your spiritual journey from my end also was an exercise in like, I think like courage and like really hearing the call. Like my sense was like, it was not easy, being like a hip Brooklyn millennial who's like refining Christianity. Like it didn't feel like that was necessarily welcome a lot of the time. And it took a lot of courage to really be like, no, but I'm really feeling called in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also you navigating me into like articulating that, exactly that feeling of just like, oh, it's not smart to be Christian. Like it's like anti-intellectual to like actually think about the world in a way that I can't rationalize. Like honestly was like my own hypocrisy about like Western concepts and like a lot of things that were ingrained into me as like quote unquote what it meant to be like a smart, like competent person in the world. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't think it's such an allegory or a lesson for anybody who's feeling called to something that doesn't feel like what other people do and not what other people are doing in their social circle or whatever. But it can really feel like, no, but this is for me, and your process of like going to church or joining groups or like all of that, reading the Bible more and like all that kind of stuff really felt like that from my end.
Yeah. And I think what's so crazy is that like, these weren't just like different parts that we had like excavated, like, like, oh, I found like my writing life and then I found my Christian. It was like, they were so intertwined. It was like this complete like skeleton of something. It wasn't just like, oh, this bit we found here and this bit we found, and then we like connected them together.
It's just like something rebirth that you're like, whoa, where did that one even come from?
Yeah. It was just like so integral to one another. Like, coming from like writing communities in New York where everyone is basically not religious, like, isn't that insane that I found God through my writing practice in New York? I just think that's like, it's very crazy to me.
Yeah.
Very beautiful. Like I'm still like, very scared of it, but it's like, it's just like this very beautiful piece that like has come, like now I can say it all makes sense. But at the time it was just like, whoa, why is this all happening? Yeah.
Yeah. And even now it's like, I can sense the, like your spirituality is it's a lie. You call it scary and freaky. And like, it's like it feels sort of like it's just within you and it arises and you're still sort of surprised by it on some level.
Yeah. It's still something that I'm like, very much working through right now.
Yeah. Well, I think this is so great because it's like you've touched on, like, I would synthesize as like at least 3 different things that coaching has been. Like it was like sometimes I like introduced something that you were like, what is this? Like with the somatic stuff, you were like, why are we feeling our knees? Like what's happening? But then there was utility to that. There was something new. Sometimes it was just like something that on some level felt really obvious, but you wouldn't think of, or like being really guided by you, or it's super gentle and slow. And then sometimes it's just like something totally new appears before us that we never could have seen, like your spirituality. I didn't know going into our work together. We didn't know that for months that was going to be a part of it.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Well, I'm interested in sort of like, maybe let's wrap it up. Like, how would you say, if you were to summarize, like, how would you say you felt different as a result of our time together? Like, what are the big things you notice?
Oh my God. It's like, it's so radical that it's hard to say, because I feel like those small shifts have accumulated into such a radical shift for me that, like, one example is like, I would work very regularly on Saturdays and Sundays. And like, for the thought of that now is like just so laughable. I would never do that. Like, maybe I would work a couple of hours on a Saturday, but that's just like such a boundary that I continue to maintain. And it just really doesn't make sense for me to do that, no matter how much work I have, even though I'm doing probably the most important work that I would think to do right now in my program. I'm not going to do that. And I think that is a huge indication of like, you don't just go from, there's so many things that need to happen for you to make that big of a habit change in a couple of years, in my opinion. And that's, I think, something of evidence that life coaching can do. Yeah, I think I feel way calmer. I don't have like an existential crisis like every night because I know what I'm doing. Yeah. I think also something that was very prevalent was like before every birthday, like just like, you know, it's like, oh God, like this chaotic turmoil of like, what am I doing with my life? What's going on? Like how, like quickly taking stock of the year. And it's like, did I do enough? Like, but based on what metric? Like, so it was just very all like, and then it would just settle after. And it's like, okay, I don't have to think about that for like another year. Like, I don't have that anymore. I don't.
Why do you think that is?
Because I know what I want to do. Like, I know what I want to do. It's really that simple. Like, I think before I was just doing things like, I mean, I don't want to say like unintentionally, but it's just like, you know, I was doing things because that was the path that was, because circumstances pushed me there. Like, and I'm not going to say like, oh, I didn't work for certain jobs or whatever, but it was just like, you know, I was just kind of plodding along and I didn't care about whether or not I wanted to do it or not, because that wasn't a question that I asked myself.
Yeah. Which is like, you know, your priorities now. You don't need to like think about what they are on your birthday. Like, it's just very clear.
And I think especially for people like in their like mid to late 20s, like that's like, I don't know, like, I feel like we always are constantly being asked like, what do you want? But like, it's like, are you actually answering the question in a way that is authentic to yourself? I don't know.
Sunny, that's juicy. That's some juicy stuff. Well, I feel like that's the ultimate insurance against the midlife crisis, right? Exactly. Having actually asked yourself what was important since your mid-20s, you know, that's a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel old in my program, but that's fine. Like you know, like that's like a whole set of other insecurities, but it's just, yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful that I'm still here at least. Like, yeah.
Oh, just the top writing program in the country that's fully funded. No big deal. No. Okay. My last question is like, what do you feel like you would like to say as a last offering to the people who are listening? Like, maybe there was an insight that you had during coaching that you were like, oh, this is really helpful. Like, the world should know, or like just about what it feels like to be coached that you feel like the world should know. Is there anything else that you want the people to know?
That seems like a really high stakes question. No. I don't know. I think like, I mean, it's truly life-changing. And as someone who's like deeply allergic to words like that, it has really altered my approach to life. And I think that there's, at least for people like me, there's an aversion to doing really, really small things and like really, really gentle things. And I think that there's a really huge power in that. And I think this kind of work, especially when it's so subtle, like it's so subtle. I don't think I did, like, I wouldn't have, I mean, obviously we were very cognizant of like a lot of the emotions that I was going through in this, but like, I don't know, it's so subtle that it feels like you're not doing anything, which is kind of the beauty of it in a way.
Ooh, that lands in my body, that it's so subtle, but then look at what happened. You're saying that your way of being feels just totally different than it was.
Yeah, it's very crazy. Yeah.
I love it. Sunny, do you have any information you want to share that people could use to find you if they want to like read your writing or I don't know?
I have nothing to offer.
Nothing to offer. Okay.
But thank you for asking. Maybe I'll tack that in once I like finish my manuscript later on. And you
Okay, we'll stick a link in the show notes,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit down the road when
Yeah.
the novel is complete.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Sunny, thank you so much for doing this.
Of course.
It's
This
such a
is so
pleasure.
fun. Yeah. Thank you, Katie.
If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.